I'm very pleased that we've got three very, very good speakers for you today. Looking at global identity initiatives, we're going to be looking at two initiatives which really have started out over in the US and are being developed over there, and then we're going to move back over here to Europe. Our first presenter is Anne West. Anne's been working at Internet2 for over 15 years now, I think, is that right? Give or take. And was probably one of the first Internet2 people I met when I started in this area. So Anne's going to be talking to you about TIER. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Nicole, and welcome everybody. I'll try to keep everybody awake after that nice lunch, complete with nice white rice and many carbs. So I'm going to talk today about a new trust and identity initiative called Trust and Identity in Education and Research. And this, I guess you could say, complements federation. So we're going to talk a little bit about the who and the what and the why, some program components and what we're doing there, and how you can find out more. So I'm going to intersperse this with a few quotes. Will Rogers is kind of like a US cowboy philosopher guy that was big in the 20s and 30s. And I figured cowboy philosophy that really, really fits what we're doing with TIER. So I thought, going out on a limb because that's where the fruit is, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. So trust and identity in research and education, really what we're trying to do is solve a problem that's at the user level. So users today on your campus, or on various campuses, I should say, have multiple roles. Not only are they faculty, possibly researchers, but they also might be parents of students, they might be alumni, and how do you manage all those roles from an individual point of view? It's pretty tough. I think the other piece of it is IT departments on campuses need to have the latitude to be able to source their services wherever they need to be, whether they're run on campus or increasingly in the cloud. And I think we're finding out more, at least in the US, that actual users are buying cloud services directly for their own use. It's pretty interesting, very tough to get your hands around, but it's pretty clear that individuals see themselves as actors in this space, in cloud acquisition actors. So we need to be able to enable and facilitate both their roles and their ability to interact with organizations, groups, individuals, both on campus and off. So right now we have an interesting approach. Speaking with my federated identity hat on, our current approach traditionally has been, I'm an institution, I want to contract with, say, a library provider to provide services for my campus. So I contract with them, and I have attribute release policy that I push into Shibboleth, for instance, to make that happen. I want to say in the US, I'm contracting with People HR. I have, again, an attribute release policy. So it's really a B2B type of relationship. And that is something that we get questions all the time about from folks who are familiar with Facebook, with Google. Well, why doesn't it work like Facebook? Why can't I go over here and just have my attributes sent over there? Why can't I just use it over there? It's like, well, yeah, that's tough. So right now, you need an attribute release policy. You have to go talk to your IT department to actually get the infrastructure changed in order for you to access things. Not terribly convenient, I might say. So what is TIER? So TIER is looking at how to enable the individual. And this is not just enabling the individual to access services. For those of you familiar, the research and scholarship tag in the federation context, that does a great job for those particular type of service providers. But we need to scale this as from a US community and a global community. But it's not only access to services, it's also about, I'm an individual and I move from one institution to the next. how to maintain my relationships out in the cloud or at the National Science Foundation in the US, for instance, how to maintain my relationships with collaborators at a national professional organization that I'm a member of. Right now, what's happening is a lot of folks are getting Gmail accounts and leveraging those and saying, hey, this is good enough. But do we want to actually put our research and scholarship in the hands of Gmail or in the hands of Google and Google accounts and Google credentialing? Some folks think that that's not a great idea. Ooh, excuse me. So the other thing is we need to enable this complexity. And I think the complexity is not only on the campus level. This is very sophisticated to be able to source services and provide access to individuals coming in from the outside as well as going from the campus to external resources. So this is really complex from an IT perspective to support, but it's also complex for users to be able to understand. So we need to make this easy to have these digital personas and be able to manage between the two or between the multiple ones. So for those of you familiar with federation and identity management, I just wanted to use a graphic to kind of give you an idea of what I think the boundaries are for what you may think of as a federation and tier. So this is just a little diagram, and the little cities there are meant to be campuses. And the yellow lines are really meant to be kind of your federated fabric, as it were, your federated identity network, I guess if I can borrow that term loosely. So in common is really these yellow lines. So it's really the fabric. Again, you might look at it as metadata services underneath all of this, but it also could be offering services that enable that federation to happen easier, or enables campuses to participate in that trust network easier. So it may be, say, like a multi-factor gateway or things like that. So that's at the national level. But tier really is helping the campus do identity and do identity correctly. I think what we're finding here is the identity is actually managed differently on every campus in the US, unless, of course, you have a vendor, in which case it doesn't really interact, or a company, some of which integrate really well with existing services and with, say, a SAML federation, some do not. So it's done really differently. I think what we're talking about is really normalizing the overall logical functions of what happens in the identity space, and then how that also interacts in an international and national space. So this is just a quick summary of some things that could be included in this tier event this tier initiative that we're looking at. This slide should look familiar to some of you. But as I mentioned earlier, it's really about getting identity right at the organizational level. So what does this mean, though, from what are we actually providing? Well, we're trying to leverage software components that are already out there. We don't want to, just like Géant, we don't want to build what's already there. We want to leverage as much as we can. So that's leveraging Grouper, it's leveraging Shibboleth, it's leveraging things like person registries that are already developed, that are already in use at institutions. But it's also, as I mentioned, enabling the individual across the federating context, giving them the ability to control their attribute release and to be able to have that mobility that they need. And then I think it's really building an interoperable network of scholarly identities. That's a very aspirational goal. How are we going to actually do that? That's something we'll be working on here in the next couple of years. So ultimately, it's probably going to be a suite of software. That'll probably include things like an API that then can connect all these various pieces together. best practices. So as you might guess, a campus that would like to federate needs to support certain practices that's going to come out of In Common. So we'll have some normalizing practices coming out of the federation that will need to be taken up by tier to be implemented at the campus level. But there will probably also be campus services or campus-related needs that we need to deploy nationally, like an account linking service, for instance, as a possibility to enable that mobility. So I think both the national level and the federation level and the tier, which is focused on campus getting it right, will need to have this nice two-step dance together to make this all go. And then, of course, we want this all to be standards-based and open source so we can have corporate partner integration as well. So let's talk a little bit about the program process. This is a quick slide that talks about the various components, identity and trust projects. We've already talked a little bit about authentication. This is pretty much motherhood and apple pie types of things. The Campus Success Projects is really building on some of the work we've done with the National Science Foundation over the last 13, 14 years in doing outreach with campuses on identity and access management. We have a long track record there, and so we'll probably be leveraging a lot of those approaches, the camps and advanced camps, if you're familiar with those, offered in the U.S., to then broaden that out and make that available and focus that on some of the tier things. But you're probably wondering a little bit is about the development process. And we have, Shel Wagoner has very wisely hired Steve Zoppi, who's my associate vice president for integration and architecture. Comes out of Silicon Valley in California and has developed a number of these large-scale iterative projects, I think 3, in various corporate settings. And so he has a ton of experience in terms of how these things can work. So in essence, what we're looking at is leveraging use cases, you might expect, and pulling out requirements there to then start building our releases. So there'll be a requirements gathering phase, a design phase, and the construction phase, and then we'll be releasing that out to the investing campuses for review and adoption. And then we'll be starting the cycle over again. So it's very iterative. The first release of tier will probably be mostly existing components that are already out there with an API to tie them together. So as we go, it will build on this baseline of the components and the glue, I guess you could say, to tie them all together. So the building blocks of this whole program, as you can probably guess, functionality, right? We need to understand what the requirements are and what we need to do there. That's pretty basic stuff. Finances, how are we going to pay for that? This is also a very interesting topic. A lot of people ask about this. The technology, I guess you could probably figure out that it's identity focused, but the technologies we're looking for are standards based. And then there's a large adoption component and helping institutions understand, okay, yes, you got this software, that's really great. Now how are you going to actually integrate it into your business process, because that's really where you get the ROI. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. For functionality, we have 2 sets of folks that we're really focused on. The first one is the Tier Community Investor Council, which is a representative of the 50 campuses that have provided investment seed money for this particular activity. As you can see, a number of them represent and are involved right now in the Common Federation Steering Committee and have come out of large development projects like Kawali. So they have some, also from a community point of view, examples of how, and history, I guess you could say, of how these large development projects have been done. This is an eye chart, I grant you. But it is the 50 investing campuses that are providing the seed money. As you notice, a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of these are research institutions. So what we're looking at is building and leveraging the complexity, understanding the complexity that they have, and building that into tier with the idea that when we start looking at working with the smaller campuses, with the complexity will help them be able to achieve the use cases that they have. So while we may be looking at some research use cases, we understand that a number of the collaboration tools and things that are needed by research are also needed at the teaching level from the diverse higher education. So let's talk a little bit about finances. That's that second arrow. So as I mentioned, the first piece of this is actually getting the seed money, and so 50 institutions have signed up, are signing up, and are committing $25,000 a year for 3 years. That's at capital call. Internet 2 roughly spends $900,000 a year on just general middleware and identity work. And then we are looking at membership dues increase of Internet 2 of about 0.7. But we understand that this first part is one-time funding, and we need to figure out how to sustain this. So there will be an annual subscription that coincides with the production release of the services as opposed to the software that campuses can run. So we'll also be offering cloud versions of this as well. So known project domains, again, this is similar to what I mentioned a little bit earlier with the squares, but it's pretty straightforward. You can see the In-Common Federation, the low left side. Again, there's a program that actually guides the Federation and a program that's guiding this campus work, and they interact. There's actually a fair amount of interaction on the governance groups. But this is pretty, as I said, motherhood and apple pie. But as I mentioned earlier, we held 3 workshops, and it was pretty clear that the engineering alone is not really going to cut it. Because some of the biggest issues that folks have had is not that they don't have software that they're using right now, it's that it's really difficult sometimes to understand and talk to, say, the individual that's responsible for privacy on your campus, or student records, or research on your campus, to understand how identity can best help them and what services and processes need to change or adapt in order to best get the return on investment. So we'll be doing some ongoing community work, both with IT and the stakeholders, and also doing outreach to corporate sector as well to try and leverage maybe third-party support for this, for assessment, consulting, and so forth. So I really like this Winston Churchill quote, but then when I looked it up again, I thought, I found a site that said, no, he really didn't say this, but it is very, we have all these lovely little graphs, and it's really great to look at the graphs, but what have you done for me lately? That's basically how I interpret that. So where are we now with this? As I mentioned, we've done 3 workshops, and they're primarily assessing the campus, so they filled out an assessment tool, and then we shared the top 2 stories. They were submitting use cases, basically, and they shared the top 2. And then we also talked with them about a number of different other requirements, constraints, things like that. The next day, we actually took this data and kind of compiled it, graphed it out, and talked about how this might fit in an existing roadmap that we've already developed. So you can kind of see we had both CIOs and identity architects there, which is really, really important. what's typically happened is that identity architects have these great ideas and they go implement it, but it takes the CIO to implement the politics and to help with that stakeholder side of things to get that ROI. So you need both of those groups to actually work together to make this happen on your campus. So these are the things I just mentioned. I think the main thing at the bottom here is our memo of understanding. Those 50 campuses are signing an MOU to basically said they're going to participate and that they will contribute the funding, the seed funding that I mentioned earlier. So that's the end of my talk. But if you'd like to learn more, you are absolutely welcome to join the email lists. And we have all of the outcomes we've developed so far, the 150 use cases, the 26 top stories, how they've been prioritized so far, frankly, the actual initial cut at the requirements, and those prioritized requirements out there on the site. Now, the next step for those requirements is to work with a community architect group to determine whether that's a complete set or if they, in essence, assume some requirements that we've actually missed. So there's vetting to do before we actually cut the first definition, the first release. So we'll be working on that. And I wanted to, given this is a global identity initiatives, I also wanted to point out that we're also working with the TIC, which is the Trust and Identity Committee, that's working across the GÉANT projects and ARC to just coordinate efforts and share documents where it's appropriate. So really excited about this because, of course, a number of the use cases that you'll see when you crack open those documents, there are a number of international ones. So while this is being developed for U.S. campuses right now and scope to that, we understand that the integration is global. So that's totally exciting. So anyway, thank you very much. And I can tell you who Yogi Berra is if you want to know that. It's a philosopher baseball player, for those of you who like baseball.
Thanks very much, Tom. Okay, so moving on, we are staying over in the US, and I'd like to invite Jack Seuss up. Jack is going to talk to us about NSTIC, which I know is something that people have heard mentioned a lot out over here, but perhaps haven't had the detail very much. So thank you very much, Jack.
Oh, thank you. So back in January, I took a leap of faith after working on a program committee with Internet2 with Youngji about submitting a proposal on NSTIC, because there was no guarantee that there would actually be something to talk about come June. But there actually is something to be talking about. So hopefully what I can report on will start to interest others in our community in thinking about how you might want to participate and how we might want to try to take this. One of the roles that I have, for a number of years I was part of In Common, and I got drafted to run for an election to be the delegate from the research, education, and innovation group that is there. I got all of 12 votes, and I was the leading vote getter, and so I won election to the Management Council, and so I've been participating in this now for 3 years. This is my third term in doing it, and so I can try to offer some perspective. Ken is also here. Ken has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, as we would normally expect Ken to be doing in many of these projects. So giving you some background, the National Strategy for Trusted Identity in Cyberspace, it came out of the United States White House, so it's what's called a presidential directive. And it was really around the idea that internet identity and cybersecurity are both lacking. No surprise there. I think many of us would have agreed with that. One of the interesting things, and this is probably more of a US-centric model, is that This stated that there must be a partnership between private sector and governments. In the U.S., we are both unwilling and unable to enact law that is going to control the commercial entities and highly regulate them. There just was not a possibility that that was going to get through our government structures, and so this was to try to be a public-private partnership. It suggested a consensus-driven approach to governance using a plenary-style process. For a few people who have been involved with that, it has been somewhat chaotic. It has been a process where we have argued more over the rules of governance than over how we should do things for roughly the first 18 months. But we are starting to make some progress. The first plenary, this is a plenary-driven approach where everyone that is a member can participate in plenaries. These plenaries are either face-to-face or virtual. The first one happened in August of 2012, and we have had subsequent plenaries thereafter, probably 3 a year. And then in 2014, as more things began to materialize, what was done was this could not be something that was launched by a U.S. government agency. Right now, the entity that has been primarily funding this activity is the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. But it was a given that it would be a disaster for this to be a government agency that is trying to launch this. And so what was done was a not-for-profit corporation named the IDESG was created to operate what is produced. And that IDSG has a board of directors. The board of directors comes from the people that are elected to the management council. So if you run for the management council, you are now on the board of directors. But over time, what we are starting to do is say that there will be ways for other board members to join into this process and be selected by the board itself. And so what we hope to see is that over time, this IDSG entity should become financially self-sufficient, and it should separate itself from the U.S. government. If it doesn't do that, it'll never be a success. But that is the sort of the thought that is going to be trying to take place is that we have through 2 more years to be moving in the direction to be away from U.S. government support. So in launching this IDSG, what we're really trying to do is sort of plan out how we become independent. And one of the things that was done was last summer, I chaired a board subcommittee that drafted a plan for rolling out the first product that we were going to have. And this is really around trying to create a model that is called the Identity Ecosystem Framework. And it's really a method for beginning to start to put in place something that might look like a trust mark system that you would have around commercial and not for commercial entities that would be there. And we really tried to focus on sort of 2 questions. What kind of operational capabilities need to be in place to deliver and maintain the framework, and how should we design and implement a framework that can grow? And one of the challenges with this is that if you begin to think that it could ever be successful, the first question that comes up is how do you deal with hundreds of thousands or millions of entities that could potentially be a part of something that's as big as a internet-based framework for trust and privacy? All right, so one of the things that we're going to have to be thinking about is that this is going to have a delegation mechanism that's going to be there. And so what we did is we came up with sort of 3 areas that we focused on in trying to look at this. Requirements, evaluation mechanisms, and then lastly, starting to think about trust mark management. What should that begin to look like over time? So requirements. One of the things that we are sort of grounded in is that we have to be based upon the initial NSTIC principles and goals. Now, I would say that the NSTIC principles and goals that were laid out were fairly generic. These are not things that are truly unique to the U.S. They generally are sitting there and would be very common privacy standards that you would have, or statements around user privacy, user usability, security, what you do with the data. Most of these things are relatively high level, and generally they're not of a lot of debate, although there probably would be some debate. One of the things that we also wanted to look at is how we can give some guidance to organization about what it means to be participating in these high-level goals. Whenever you say something about, how you should manage data or what you should be doing, the devil is in the details. And so we have to begin giving a little bit more information around what the practices are that uphold the NSTIC vision. And what we also wanted to make sure is that if we were in fact implementing this, it's going to increase trustworthiness of digital interaction for all parties. And what we mean by that is we've all seen where technology has been used very effectively by people who want to do bad things, to take advantage of the technology. And so if we created a system that somehow had a visual trust mark, and that was the only thing associated with it, clearly what people would do is they would copy the digital trust mark, they would put it up on bad sites, and unless you had some policing enforcement entity that's looking at all sites on the web, you could potentially be tricking users into thinking that's a trustworthy site when in fact it's just someone that's copied the logo and put that up on their website. And so we had to think about mechanisms that were going to be ultimately more secure than just some visual representations of things. Finally, when we started to talk about how we should go about doing things, one of the things we as a board have tried to say is that there should not be something where the IDESG is really having to create from first principles how it does things, what the frameworks are, the standards, the certifications, the protocols. There are other bodies that are already doing all of this. What we should say is what ones of these are we comfortable with ratifying as open standards that would be there. And so a big part of the work is trying to get people away from trying to create their own unique view of the ecosystem and leveraging existing areas that are already in place. The second part, though, is there are some areas where there may not be adequate information to date, and that would be a place where you would have NSTIC committees begin to develop their own requirements that would be there. Probably one of the classic spaces that we've seen in this would be accessibility. There really has not been great work done in accessibility. Ken has done a lot that as part of his NSTIC pilot that has sort of highlighted that could be an area where it could greatly benefit many communities. So as we started to think about evaluating, one of the things that we really want to look at is often I spent many years in common steering, and we've dwelled upon IDP requirements. How should the assurance of IDP be measured? What do we do for interoperating about IDPs? But we often don't spend nearly as much time evaluating the security, trustworthiness, and other things of SPs. And so a big part of this is trying to make sure that the service providers, the people that are going to be a part of this, will also be evaluated and have to be deemed trustworthy. We have created a committee that is called the Trust Framework and Trustmark Committee that is going to define how we pull these information pieces together, and it gets involved if there are disputes over whether or not people are adequately adhering to what was set up. One of the things that the committee is looking to do is this is a volunteer committee. A volunteer committee can't run an organization that is trying to register tens, hundreds, thousands of organizations. And so what we're really looking to do is create a staffed organization where we have a framework office that handles all of the back office operations. And so we're standing up sort of a corporate entity that is going to be able to run the listing service and be able to move that forward. And one of the areas that we're taking a very close look at is something that is called the Cloud Security Alliance. What we've seen happen with the Cloud Security Alliance, which has come out around auditing standards, is that they run a web-based listing service that looks at what different auditing standards are and how you can interrelate them. We think that might be a model, at least initially, for how we can get going. So what's the role for federations in this? So in the initial version that's going to come out in the next month or two, there's really going to be a very limited role, probably none right off the bat. But very shortly after that, what we're expecting to happen is that federations will be the way that we get most of our members coming in. That what would be the possibility is a federation would join and say, yes, we adhere to the NSTIC requirements. What we are going to do is bring forth our members to be a part of the NSTIC Federation. They would be part of the listing service. They would ultimately have access to the trust marks. We're envisioning that over time, vertical organizations, there's different stakeholder groups. These stakeholder groups will be able to develop their own trust marks that are completely independent of what NSTIC is doing. These trust marks will be able to be used within that vertical area for stakeholder organizations. What the IDSG would be functioning as is a forum to come together and try to basically create a common trust mark. And as I was talking to Ken, a good example becomes RNS as an example. InCommon has an RNS, Gian has an RNS. Well, what if another federation? We've sort of been using refeds as a model for trying to do this. But what we're seeing is that it may very well be something like the IDSG, because it has more connection to governments, is going to ultimately be a better way of bringing together various parties and figuring out what should be a part of a trust mark. Should that trust mark be broken into multiple trust marks? Should it be rationalized in some other way? We're trying to develop processes for how we would envision that happening. We fully expect that there will be third-party assessors for all of these things. It is not going to be the IDSG that is doing the assessment activities. It is going to be relying upon auditors, federations, Kantaras of the world to come to the table and help do the assessment. In the first part of what we're doing, it is all self-attested, so we're not going to have an audited component. But I would guess within the next 12 to 15 months, the goal is to try to be releasing one that can be audited and validated. Part of this is recognizing what we want to do is to be able to look at all of the differing auditing frameworks that are out there and understand if you've been audited under this auditing environment, what requirements does that mean that you've automatically met? And then you can check those off knowing you've met because you've been audited under a particular scheme. That will automatically bring you into compliance, or if you're missing one or two of the areas, you can then have somebody come in and audit you for the few items that you're missing to be audited on. Let's see, trust mark management. Let me go quickly into that. So the framework committee spent a lot of time debating trust marks. We really think that electronic trust marks are the way to ultimately go. I know that in the past, Georgia Tech has presented here around what Georgia Tech is doing in their pilot. When we looked at this last summer, we felt that the Georgia Tech trust mark pilot was really a best example of what the future is going to be in terms of lots of very small granular trust marks that can be built up almost as Lego pieces into differing things that you could then say, I have requirements that I meet X or Y or Z. we decided that it was too early to adopt a model like the Georgia Tech model right now. We thought that there really needed to be a lot more discussion that's happening within the community in order to do electronic trust marks. And in reality, electronic trust marks will have their greatest value when they are evaluated through a third-party assessor. And so when you start to see the third-party assessment is when I think you'll see us really trying to be ramping up the Trustmark model that will be there. I should also say there's still a tremendous amount of debate, and this would be, I know Leif is here and others who are doing like vectors of trust with the IETF. There's a lot of question about what should be the granularity of Trustmark. Should they be very high level? Should they be very low level? The Georgia Tech vision basically said there were lots of low-level trust marks that got built up into a trust mark profile that represented the high-level instantiation of that. We think that model is actually one that's quite flexible, and it allows you to compare standards pretty well. But we're open to other options that people want to come forth with. And I would encourage this community to really push ideas if you have them. This was just a link to the NSTIC Trustmark pilot that was out at Georgia Tech, and it has lots of information on their Trustmark system. If any of you want to take a look at it, you can go out to the site when you download the presentations that would be there. But I do think it is an interesting example because what Georgia Tech is able to show is that by decomposing the trust marks into these granular items, they can generate multiple trust mark profiles for sites very quickly, or they can tell you what small things you're missing to make you eligible for another trust mark profile if you want to move to that. And to me, I think that's going to be a very powerful thing for people. So where are we today? On next, it's the Thursday, 2 weeks from Thursday will be the next plenary. It's the 29th or 30th. It is going to be taking place, it's Thursday the 25th, excuse me. It's 1 to 5 Eastern time in the US. And what we're going to be hoping to do is ratify the first set of functional requirements. I'm going to talk about the functional requirements in just a minute. We're also going to be adopting as standards that are acceptable in the IDSG, the NIST Risk Management Framework for Federal Information Systems, and the security and privacy controls for federal information systems and organizations. What we would love to see is more entities coming forth with ideas for additional standards that we can start to get in the process. And what we want to do is start ratifying a variety of standards that we feel are open and that can be accommodating to this community that would be there. We picked a couple that seem to be relatively straightforward. And what we hope to do, though, is add many more over the next few years. So, the requirements that came out. We had 45 requirements, which on one side I think might be too many, but on the other side, when you look at them, they're fairly high level. The requirements end up crossing 4 different areas: interoperability, privacy, security, and usability. And you can see that the bulk of the requirements are in privacy and security. And so these areas are items that you can go out and take a look. I've created a spot where you have a link to the requirements that would be out there. Again, our goal in trying to do these requirements is to be setting up something that we hope map to what the strategy had entailed for the NSTIC, and that this could be something that fairly quickly groups could be self-attesting to. An example of some requirements. One was in interoperability, and it says for federation compliance, when conducting digital identity management functions within an identity federation, entities must comply in all substantial requests with the published policies and system rules that explicitly are required by that federation, according to the minimum criteria set by that federation. So it's just saying if you're using the federation as a way to dictate yourself at a station, you have to be following the rules that were set forth by that federation. Privacy. Entities must provide concise, meaningful, and timely communication to users describing how they collect, generate, use, transmit, and store personal information. Now, these things aren't, there's certainly going to be ambiguity in these items. There are going to be examples of how you can evaluate yourself related to these. But for the U.S., this is beginning to be a first step, maybe a baby step, if we want to call it that, in trying to move forward with some, I think, rational statements. What we've created is something called SALS, the Self-Attested Listing Service, that is going to be a process where you can apply and say, I meet the requirements. There's going to be some forms that you fill out. It's a web-based form. You'll explain why you think you meet this. The reality is that unless you just type in gibberish, where it's not really words, the IDSG is not going to evaluate what you typed and say, well, you really don't meet the true meaning of this. What we are going to do is post whatever you type into the listing service so that outside entities can evaluate what your claims are, and that will be the record that they can take a look at to be determining whether or not they should in fact trust you. And it's trying to give a little bit more transparency to the operations that are taking place now on the internet. In some ways, I think the SALS process has some parallels to the in common principles of practice. However, much more detail is required. Ultimately, the plan, as I said, is going to be that federations are going to be able to join. And my hope is that we really start to talk among some people around how we can have a role for electronic trust marks. One of the things that I became a big believer in is the electronic trust marks can really be helpful in beginning to automate activities. If you think of the scalable privacy mechanism that Ken has been working with, or Privacy Lens could be viewing these electronic trust marks and validating for you ahead of time whether or not you want to interact with that site or not based upon the electronic trust marks that have been generated. I think there's going to be a real opportunity if we think through how to do electronic trust marks effectively. And then lastly, as we sort of come to the end, why should refeds care? Well, the one thing I can tell you is if you're in the UK, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, there's people participating in this. And there's a lot of government-to-government interaction that's taking place. And these are one of those things that our community has been so far ahead of where the IDSG and NSTIC is that we haven't paid any attention to it. But it could sneak up on you, that all of a sudden this is something that is going to be taken hold of by your governments. And so I think ultimately, at least those countries are going to align on a solution, whether it's what we're proposing now or something else. There's a lot of involvement that's happening across those various areas. And so I would love to continue to see more and more people coming to the table. If it's successful, the IDSG offers a potential way to improve practices, especially in accessibility, by pressuring cloud service providers. I think in the education space, at least in the US, but I would hope also in Europe, we could do a lot around thinking about accessibility requirements and how we might want to work with service providers and what that would mean. And then lastly, we all want to increase the value of federation, making certain that NSTIC aligns to what REFEDS is doing, making certain that it helps all parties. You know, when you think of it, EduGain, RNS, scalable privacy, second factor are all aligned with where IDSG is going. In many ways, In Common, REFEDS, the larger communities that are here are the model for how much of this should be working. And if we don't participate and help them, they are likely to create something that will not necessarily work as well with our current existing practices. And that could ultimately be problematic for higher education or the R&E space. And that was it. And my Yogi Berra is, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So, are there any questions? Oh.
Thank you. Hello. Two quick questions. I was interested in the governance of ID, the ID ecosystem, because I was looking at your member list, and you have 325 voting members, which seems an interestingly large number to get people to agree on things for. And the second question was, could you speak to how this relates to, say, Kantara's work that they've been doing for a few years?
So let me do the latter one first. So Kantara has been connected as a special representative that is linked to it, but it's not a member. So we consider it an entity that we want to partner with, and is one that brings a lot of best practice, especially in the assessment space that would be there. Related to the 325 members, I agree. The governance process that has been put forth has been a challenge. But I would say that governance, especially around something like this, is always a very messy process unless you have an entity that is dictating that process, and then it's not really governance. And so what we have struggled with is that, yes, there have been a lot of members, there have been a lot of divergent opinions. I can tell you that out of the 325 members, probably 80 to 100 might have come from the US higher ed space. So we tried to push a lot of people into there just to make sure that it wasn't going to do something that was taking us down a road that would undermine In Common. The other industry representatives all think that they have solved the identity problem. And so, you know, if we would just adopt their solution, everything would be fine. And so there is a bit of a challenge about how do you say, no, you know, you can't have a single solution that is going to solve all of the identity space. But I think over the last couple of years, as we failed to produce anything, people have sort of given up on this. And now we're slowly coming out with some initial product. And I will give a shout out to Jamie of Oasis, who many of you know from the early days. Jamie did a lot of work on these requirements to sort of take what had been a variety of statements and normalize them in a way that actually makes sense. And so I think that we're in a better spot than I had actually anticipated when I made the proposal back in January.
Hi, Jack. This is Tom Barton. I just wondered, is there a roadmap that the IDESG has put together and is trying to follow? I mean, I'm kind of resonating partly with a lot of things that you were talking about, but also with the last statement about it could sneak up on us. That would be, when should we see in the roadmap that we should be paying closer attention, perhaps?
So the roadmap, I think the quote was actually right on. They're going to keep taking forks in the road. And so it's hard to say that we can tell you what the roadmap is going to be 3 years from now. For me, where I think we are is that we're going to release the self-attested listing service. I think you'll see the NSTIC pilots. There's probably about 20 of those entities adopt and join this. This is just really a process of how do we get to signing people up, validating them? It's just sort of, can you, going back, I know Tom's a math professor, it's the n=1, 2, 3. When you start to do a proof, validating that you can begin to do some certain things and that they produce correct results. What we really need to be doing is scaling this up dramatically, and that is going to be, I think, happening probably a year from now. So there's going to be a big push around trying to do some point releases between now and next summer. But next summer, we should be coming out with one that has the capability of being assessed and has the ability to have trust marks associated with that. If you see that starting to come out next summer, if it's me or if it's someone else that's coming here from NSTIC giving you an update on that, that would be a sign that it has a likely sticking power that would be there, at least in the US. If we can't get to that by next year, it's going to be harder to tell how successful it's going to be, because the U.S. will go through a presidential transition in November of 2016, and it's likely to create people coming in with a whole new set of, this is how we should solve this problem. And so what our hope is that we can get far enough along that people say, oh, yes, there does seem to be a possibility that they can work it out and actually make this be a reality before we see that people want to go back to square one.
Hi, Jack. This is Nick Roy. So is this program intended to be a replacement for the old FICAM trust framework provider process, or is it in parallel to that?
So it's somewhat in parallel to that. And what I mean by that is that FICAM was how federations could use their credentials to access government services. And right now, the government agencies are controlling that process. It is expected that over time, FICAM and NSTIC will likely align. But and government is one of the stakeholder groups within the NSTIC environment that would be there. But it's not one where in day one it's going to necessarily take the place. What will happen though is if you were FICAM certified, we'll be able to tell you that yes, in fact, you meet 95% of the NSTIC requirements. And so if you have the bronze or silver certification, the only three things you need to look at are these three items in the requirements. And if you meet those, you could easily self-attest by saying you were bronze certified or silver certified through InCommon. And this is how you meet these other three items that would be there.
So as far as international interoperability goes, it's good that they're inviting international participants, but I notice two particularly interesting pieces. One is that the governments that you mentioned that are actively participating in this are members of the Five Eyes, right? And that the founding documents are still NIST papers. So is there any consideration of something that could be done to set at ease those people that no longer fully trust NIST?
Well, I think that, one, I agree that that's a fair statement. I think that one of the items that there was a lot of discussion about is there is some discussion that's beginning to start happening within the UN around how some of these processes, what everyone agrees is that if we think the governance challenge was difficult in trying to get NSTIC started, it's even going to be more challenging in working through a UN body that would be there. But we know it's one of those things you have to start, and some number of years you'll ultimately come out with something that is successful. But that is a process that's starting to take place where they're trying to look at how some of these things can be more internationalized. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
So I've no idea who this lady is. As well as being my partner in crime in Refeds, Licia is leading a new project called ARC in the EU, and is going to talk a bit about ARC and how that fits into the wider structure of identity projects in our environment. Thank you, Licia.
Thank you, partner in crime.
Hooray.
So, I'm not going to talk a lot about ARC, but I want to mention ARC in the context of the rest of other things we are doing. But a little bit, I think probably because we are here, it's been many years, so I got a little bit nostalgic, and I thought, why don't we get a look at the past, what happened and how we got where we are now. And also, of course, when you start looking at that, you think maybe you should also look at where we want to be. But of course, this is all my view, and as such, it can be questionable. So, I have to remember to stay still. It's been 10 years of Salmon. Yeah, we celebrated. Oh, yeah, we celebrated this with a news item. There have been many other celebrations. There's been 10 years of Refeds. Yeah, we had big cakes for those of you who were here on Sunday. And of course, there has been 10 years really means of federated access, which is really a lot if you think about that. But let's look a little bit at the past. Our community started to share things very early, and the first probably use cases were really among institutions within the same campus, the intra-institutional sharing of information, e-learning, and so on. But of course, online access was becoming already 10 years ago the thing to be. Students were going around, we have been talking about this mobility of students for, I don't know, as far as I joined at the time Terena, now Geant. So it was really a big factor. And the demand to access resources remotely was growing. Probably it's not comparable to what we have now, being online anywhere, anytime, all devices and so on. But it was already there. You could see that coming. I took this a little bit, from the Internet Archive. Actually, I stole this from Anne Harding that presented that at the Internet 2 meeting in April. And it's kind of funny because what he says here is that people were very happy that they had to do less work. What was really funny when I read that was that some campuses use this argument not to join federated access because they are afraid they will have to deal with more calls to deal with services, to support services that they don't have in-house. So it's kind of funny. But in any case, this has been a main driver. But while the US was busy doing shibboleth and throughout the campuses, there were lots of things happening in Europe at the time. Things were not so consolidated as they are now. So I Googled and I found this link to an event that was organized by Switch, where they were doing demo shibboleth, and they were showing the overview of the AI in Europe. And of course, I should not forget, how could I, among all people, about EduRoam. This is really where everything started, and probably EduRoam reached a maturity a little bit earlier than the Identity Federation. It's a little bit of a different use case, but you can see a pattern. When people started doing federations, there is, in some cases, first they start with EduRoam and then they go up to the next level, that is Identity Federation. In some cases, it's the reverse, but they are kind of married. Which is right? Are you laughing, Tom, because I said kind of married? Should I said only married? Okay. So how did it all start? How many of you remember this? Yeah, so you are all old enough. Welcome. And the funny thing of all this is that, for instance, Select was the tool that was being tested in the Netherlands, but it was not all in the Netherlands. The Australian, I don't know if Heath and Mark know that, they were really looking at this to be the software to build their own federation. And Papi, which I call Papi Chulo for my Spanish friends, was really it was used, and Switch was in fact testing at the same time Shibboleth and Papi. And then, of course, how could I forget? Spock. Roland Hedberg, permits. So, and there were all kind of funny things, how all these things could get together. How can I combine this? What does what is the, who does more authentication, more authorization, and so on. And then the good year started, 2005. I was not invited at this meeting. I was not important enough. Not that I am now, but anyway. There was this Cotswold meetings that was kind of the, in a way, was laying down the fundament also for what ReFeds is now. And at the time, there was really this positioning of SHIB as the software to do identity federation. And SAML was really becoming the, well, lingua franca for identity federation. And of course, that also was the time where other implementation of SAML were starting, Simple SAML PHP and commercial implementation that are also there now. I stole this slide from Tom Verschuren, who used to work for Surfnet, left a few years ago. And this is from the compendium. Those were the federation at the time, 2005. I don't know why the UK is missing, because I'm sure it should have been on the list. Maybe they were just lazy and didn't fill in the compendium, I don't know. But in any case, there were, as you can see, there were already at least six NRNs that say that they had a production federation. And many of them, they were really planning. They were just waiting and see what to do and how to do things. So what were the challenges back then? Because of course, you know, there were challenges. So those were really, again, from my point of view, the main challenges. One of the things was a lot about business model. How do you get the funding? Why should you do federation? Everything works so fine. Why should you change anything? Come on. You don't do changes in this community. Well, not so frequently. And already at the time, I found some slides from Ken Klingenstein, who was talking about we need to support the VOs. I'm not sure that the VOs at the time were the same as we intend today. But what was interesting is the scheme harmonization. At the time, there was the belief, naive belief, that we would agree on the semantic of the attributes. We really believed we were getting there. And we were looking at interfederation. This is really one of the first architecture of EduGain, which looks rather complex. And for this, I think you can blame Ingrid, Klaas, and Diego, who draw the diagram, if I remember correctly. So, but what happened after this? Things changes. There has been really a lot really of happening in the last years, because EduGain changed a lot. Went through several reincarnations over time. In 2011 was really the kickoff of EduGain, the service as we know now. And then you can read a little bit of numbers. You know, there are lots of federations, 56 federations, if I got the latest number right. And you have seen these slides already, so. 60. 60! Oh my God, this was only a few. How is that possible? Okay, they keep growing up. So you have seen these slides, and you have probably seen these slides many times, how the map looks very colorful. And we didn't have a map back then, which means we didn't have a lot of colors. So today, identity is really queen, maybe not in the same way, but still, I don't think we can argue on the fact that there is really a big demand for federated access. I mean, even those that were not believers in the beginning, now they see some benefits in doing federated access. And maybe identity is not as important as the network yet, because nobody talks a lot so much about the network as users. Mostly you are there, it's granted, it works. You only care if it doesn't work. And the same is happening for eduroam, in fact. Users want to access services across various infrastructure. This is really something that we hear a lot. In many cases, users tell you, I don't care what I have. I just want to log in, and then I want to get to the service. If I have a certificate, if I have a SAML, if I have, the system should do some magic and allow me to access what I need. Although there are, some other issues related to that. That would be simple if it were only that. And there is, also, of course, a lot of work in the industry. If we were really pioneering the technology at the time, the industry nowadays is really very much aggressive in this market, for different reasons probably, but certainly something that we cannot underestimate. The challenges, you have seen these slides, right? And this is how it looks today. So let's go back. One more. So, just a little bit about the colors. I believe that we have a way to deal with scalability. We have kind of found a way to deal with attributes. I mean, we have a do person, maybe Shaq is complementary to that in a way. We realized that we should not touch the semantics anymore. It's not going to change anything. But we have new challenges at the same time. And those came out, they were really clearly identified by the Film for Art paper, as well as a study that we did in Terranos a few years ago. But as you can see, there are few things that are still there, but in a way they changed. I think the authorization is not probably a problem as it was many years ago. I think the main problem is now the lack of attributes and all the issues related to that. It's not really the process as such. And of course the support for the VOs, it's there, but I think again it has changed. So what are we doing about that? Well, there are already, there is a lot of work happening in different places. There is the work that the US is doing within Common and TIR. There is the GEANT work, there is REFEDS. But we started this new project in May, 1st of May, which is called ARC, Authentication and Authorization for Research and Collaboration. It is a 2-year funding project with 20 partners. And as you can see, unlike other projects, we have really different parties that are represented as equals. We have, I believe, 10 NRNs, kind of 18 infrastructures providers such as CERN, EGI, DARIA is represented as well, Elixir is represented, and via some partner, UDAT is represented, libraries are there. So we cannot find a lot of excuses along the lines, oh yeah, we didn't have the budget, yeah, we cannot do anything together. That is not there anymore. We don't have a huge budget, but still we've got enough to really do some serious work. What is it we want to do? Well, the goal will be, ideally, in the ideal world, we want to avoid that new project have to work on AI and create yet another infrastructure. So the main starting point for us is really to build on federated access. So we want to build EduGain is the starting point. We want to improve the uptake of federated access via training, well-defined training, particularly in the communities that are represented. We want to look at ways to integrate the existing AIs, and that's really, I think, the challenge is, the main challenge here. We are not going to develop anything for the sake of that. And this is not because we don't believe that you need to do fancy things, new research. Actually, this community should do a lot of that if we want to be competitive. This is just not the right place where you do that. You also need to say, okay, let's see how we can integrate. So the development that will happen only to stitch what we have there, one way or the other. There is some work on how we should harmonize policies, and there are some specific things we want to look at, and this will leverage a lot on the work that REFEDS has done, and we will use a lot of REFEDS for that. And the training is really a main component. There are lots of things that have happened so far. So we will start by looking at the packages that are there, maybe repackage them, look at what has changed. But we realize that when we talk to some of the community, also for instance the library, they are still looking for a case to get funding, basically to persuade the CEO to allocate the resources and so on. So there is a case to get back to the business case, or what's called now value proposition. And there is some work happening also in the APAN task force and in the REFEDS for that. So just to confuse you or clarify you, depending, how ARC fits in all this landscape. As I said, ARC will look at real use cases, pilots, and some training, but we will use REFEDS particularly to get the feedback from the federation operators. We'll use the Film for Art group to get really the feedback from the user community. And we'll try to route any results. All the operations won't be in ARC. ARC is a temporary thing. It's just a mean. But we will use existing infrastructures, for instance, Géant, but there are others, to really develop the business case and to operate the services. And of course, EduGain is really there as the main object, because EduGain at the end will have really to implement, to deploy what comes out from ARC. So where do we want to be then after all this? Well, to start with, of course, we are now not called middleware anymore, if you realize that. When you say middleware, people look at you, aren't you doing trust and identity? So already the name suggests something much more business-like. So we should keep up to the challenge. There are some changes that you can already, well, some of the things are happening now. For instance, there is lots of pressure on the IDPs. The IDPs have to do everything at the moment. And I think the role of the IDPs will change. Maybe they will do something much more limited, much more authentication only, much less attributes. Maybe there will be other solutions for that. For instance, we will have national single authentication point like the EduID in Sweden, or maybe we will have institutional IDP that talk to the national IDP somehow, so that we will have more hubs. So all this is shaping up, and there are some projects already there. Switch is looking at one of these projects. I don't remember the name. EduID? No. It's called EduID? Yeah, Swiss EduID. So they are looking at that. I believe SurfNet is also looking at something similar. So the federation probably will change in the sense there are lots of discussion as to whether the federation operators will have to do more to support the institution, take up some more duties. Maybe they will need, there are also already some things that are happening. For instance, some of the traditional hub and spoke federation are offering some meshy stuff. And conversely, some of the mesh federation are looking for some hobby, somehow, small things. So, but maybe those approach will become much less, so maybe we will have less of the classical hub and spoke and mesh, that will be maybe a bit more messy, all in all, somehow. And then, of course, we need to cope with the privacy law and the mess that Europe will become fairly soon. I thought that the new directive that was going to start in 2017, 2018 will solve lots of problems. I hear now that the new directive, it's not going to be implemented equally throughout Europe, but there will be some space for customization. So we are back to square one. It's not clear, but I'm not an expert, so I don't want to say too much about this. But certainly, I was hoping for some help, but I don't think we will get so much of that. And then, of course, engagement with other sectors. Well, there was the presentation before, the NSTIC work, and in Europe we have the eIDAS. So we have somehow to engage at some level, unclear yet, with governments. And I think probably different countries will follow different approaches due to the various development and usage of governmental IDs. Industry. I mean, there seems like at the moment we are having SAML is becoming the technology for the research and education group, and the industry is moving to OpenID Connect. I mean, maybe it's all good, maybe we just need bridges, hubs, or translators, however we want to call them. We just need ways to link everything and it will be good. Or maybe we have to look at, reconsider whether we want to be the SAML group and change, I don't know. But how do you change? I mean, what are the drivers, what are the costs, how do you do that? But, of course, because it's Porto, and then I felt very mellow and positive, I thought that we will solve all this somehow. And, well, at least I believe that we will have something in place to deal with incident response. I mean, there is Certified that is already looking at that, and besides, all federations have some practices in place. How we want to implement that, that's a different issue, but there are already some consideration on that. So we will have somehow a solution for the attribute release, maybe via attribute providers, maybe via different solution, maybe even changing the model, maybe make the user more in charge of things. Why should we protect the user so much? Maybe the user should decide something in this model. So this means that we will be able to support also some of the issues related to the VOs. And I think the work that Lucas has done in Géant on the enabling users task has proven that indeed you can achieve something if you work close with the community. There are really some of the use cases that have been addressed via that. And I believe that also ARC will be able to deliver results there. And I think we'll have something that works for non-web, whether it will be the ECP, finally, which I thought was dead a few years ago, and now it's back. Or whether we will have something else, I don't know, but we should have something that is really usable for non-web use cases, particularly because many of us, well, all of us have all kinds of devices and we want to log into the apps. And that's really a main driver. It's not only the few group of cool researchers that need to access these shell, gray, black-looking screens. So we have to find a solution for that. So this is really my last slide. I think that there is plenty of work ahead because all these challenges, I mean, if they have not been solved so far, it's not because we were lazy, it's because they are difficult as such. And it requires really different parties to engage at different level. And this has been also a challenge because I think various groups were so busy trying to solve their own problem, trying to deploy their own AI and federation and what have you, that there wasn't so much time for collaboration. And I think the environment is right now to really collaborate rather than reinventing the wheel. ARC is an example of that. There are really, well, Refeds is an example of that. We have been doing that for many years. There are also some push from our, well, from for example, the European Commission, the user, the VOs. So I think we are really now, there is really an agreement on the fact that we should really solve the challenges that have been there pending for a few years. And I would like to thank Switch for allowing me to steal their graphics because they're really super cool, and I keep stealing them. And of course, for my thanks is also for Brooke for allowing me to steal the maps and the logos and everything. Thank you.
So, you know, thinking about your historical analogy, I would put federation, the state of federation sort of reminds me of where the state of the internet was just before it became commercialized. You know, so if you were at 1992, you know, now you're beginning to see that 94 comes and it becomes this wild west of new things and all that. I'm just curious, does that resonate with you? And if it does resonate with you, knowing that in a few years we might have this wild west with the commercial sectors coming in, what are the few things that we should do to get our house in order before it becomes, you know, just a madhouse of everyone trying something different?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had the answer to that question, I would be rich. No, but I think you're right. But this is really a pattern. Sometimes history repeats itself. So that's why it's nice to look at the past to learn. I don't know what we should be doing because I'm not a network person. I mean, I was not there doing the network part. So I think somebody that has really much more experience with the network could probably share that so we could learn a lesson from them and see what we should be doing.
This is Tom again. I wanted to kind of address that a little bit. I note that, we built Internet 2 in the RNE networks that are the mainstay of meetings like this one after the commercial internet as a response to, because they didn't serve our sector's needs. In the case of identity, we're doing it first, not responding to what they did first. So I don't know that we can really draw that analogy from the past. It's a little different circumstance. Probably there's some things we can look at history, but it's not. Yeah, it's the other way around this time.
There shall be until.
Shel Wagner from Internet 2. Thanks, Licia. I think that the biggest challenge that we have in moving the work of the last decade forward is there has been a lot of engagement and discussion about where we need to go, but the commercial sector is moving much faster than we are now. So even though we had a lead in vision, we had a lead in handling some of the hard problems, we don't have the incentive that they have to make money that drives acceleration. And while that's a good thing that we're not focused on the financial return, it's a bad thing because we're not focused on results or outcomes in a very timely basis. We're okay working through problems over a period of time. Can you just talk a little bit about the ReFeds group and the work that you're all involved in, and what can we do to help accelerate deliverables? Because some of it's political, some of it's technical, but I think there's a sense of urgency now that's growing on us given the commercial sector's investment. And the last thing any of us, I think would be beneficial is to have all of our students, faculty, and staff logging in with Facebook IDs or Google IDs and lose all of the metadata associated and the privacy protections that we've worked so hard to gain.
Well, this was what I was trying to say, maybe in a more subtle way. Do we want to become the legacy group doing only some, or do we want to get ahead? Do we want to move faster? I don't know what are the drivers for that, because what I see is that also whenever you try to do something, if you have something that is production, you cannot touch that. It's production, which is true, it's production. But how do we ensure that we have something that is less production that we can destroy without damaging anything? And I don't have an answer for that. But there is certainly something, my view will be, if you cannot fight the enemy because it's too big for you, maybe you should try to befriend that. And maybe keeping fighting Google and Facebook and say, oh, no, it's really bad that we use their identity, maybe we should change the approach. If maybe we should find a way to use that just as an authentication and get the attributes that you want to use elsewhere, maybe combining them with other things. And that should be fairly simple, the technology. The production and the operations and the policies that becomes always a little bit complex. And in ReFeds, I think Nicole can say a lot about that. Whenever you try to really get something agreed upon, and even if you set the deadline with big fonts, past the deadline, people come with all kind of issues, etc. So you have to reopen the consultation process, etc. Why is that? I don't know. I don't think that people are lazy. Maybe, if anything, people are too busy and there is not enough time to really to sit and think. And then you realize, oh my God, they're going to decide. The deadline has passed. I have to say something. So maybe we need a little bit more workforce in place to support some of the things. If you have only 3 people in a federation and they have to do everything, how can they also spend time to look at new things, do research, test, and engage? So I think ReFeds has now a process in place. There is certainly an incentive to look at other things. I think Chris Phillip had a nice presentation on Sunday to how should we deal with some of the commercial products that now are that the community wants to use. But I don't think we came to a conclusion yet. But certainly something we want to look at.
I have one question.
You?
Yes. So,
Come here, Nicole, come.
We can do it together.
We can do it together.
So, given that ARC is EU funded and EU focused, because that's where the funding is coming from, can you say a little bit about how ARC can be relevant to all of the other federations and other countries that we have in the room?
Yeah, right. I keep saying to everybody that ARC is open to anybody. So if there are people that want to collaborate, they are very welcome to join ARC. The point is that we cannot pay for their work. There is, limited amount. But we are already engaging. For instance, we have been talking to Jim Basney to look, for instance, at the Cialogon, whether we should replicate a Cialogon for Europe. We have some of the, we have been working, for instance, on the Certify, and that's Tom, so there is the US component as well. And what we want to do, we want to we use the ARC funding to support at least some of the people working on existing activities. So there is an ARC mailing list that's open, anybody can subscribe, so if you are interested, you just contact me. The website, everything will be there, so you can just look up for things, blogs, etc. We just started, so there isn't a lot there. But if you have an interest and you want to join the technical group, the policy group, you are really very welcome. The only thing is that we cannot provide any funding for that. But if you can find the funding elsewhere or not, you are very welcome to join. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you very much. That session went by really quickly. So yeah, that session went by really quickly. I hope you found it useful. I thought that was a great review of where we are. It only leaves me to remind you to go and have a look at the posters when you go downstairs to have your break and your coffee and the lovely cakes they keep putting out to make us all fat. And also keep an eye out on your email for arrangements for the shuttles going to the gala dinner tomorrow night. If you're joining us there, you really should join us there. It's going to be a great dinner. And I'd also like to then say thank you once more to Jack and to Anne, particularly you guys for travelling all the way over here to be with us, and to Licia. Thank you all very much.